In November 1918, as the guns fell silent across Europe, British naval architects outlined what they called the 1918 design, a 22,800-ton fleet carrier intended to eclipse HMS Argus. Plans called for a full-length flight deck, enclosed hangars, and heavy anti-aircraft batteries to project air power across the Atlantic. Within months, post-war budget cuts and demobilization ended the project. Only blueprints survived, but they pointed toward the supercarriers that would dominate the next war. As Japan emerged from World War I, the Imperial Navy authorized studies for large fleet carriers exceeding 30,000 tons. These early 1920s concepts, building on lessons from Hosho and the converted battlecruiser Akagi, envisioned armored flight decks and air groups of 60-plus aircraft. The Washington Naval Treaty's tonnage limits forced Japan to abandon these ambitious designs, but the studies laid groundwork for later carriers like Shokaku and Zuikaku. France's Joffre-class carriers, authorized in 1938, were designed to displace 18,000 tons and carry 40 aircraft. Two ships, Joffre and Painlevé, were laid down at Saint-Nazaire and Brest, but the fall of France in 1940 halted construction when both hulls were roughly 20% complete. The Germans scrapped Painlevé for steel, while Joffre's incomplete hull was broken up after the war. The Joffre class represented France's last attempt at fleet carriers before 1945. Germany laid down Flugzeugträger B in 1938 at Germania Werft in Kiel as a sister to Graf Zeppelin. Planned at 33,550 tons with capacity for 42 aircraft, the carrier would have operated Bf-109T fighters and Ju-87C dive bombers. Construction halted in September 1940 when Kriegsmarine priorities shifted to U-boats. The 30% complete hull was towed to Königsberg, then Gotenhafen, before being scrapped in 1940. Flugzeugträger B came closer to completion than any other German carrier project. Soviet designers developed Project 71 in 1939 as a 14,000-ton light carrier for the Baltic and Black Sea fleets. The design called for 30 aircraft, oil-fired boilers, and modest speed. Stalin's purges had decimated the naval design bureaus, and technical challenges with aircraft catapults and arresting gear proved insurmountable. When Germany invaded in June 1941, Project 71 was shelved indefinitely. It would be 4 decades before the Soviet Union seriously pursued carriers again. As Graf Zeppelin neared completion in 1940, German planners sketched a follow-on design designated Flugzeugträger C. The study proposed increasing displacement to 35,000 tons and air group to 50 aircraft, incorporating lessons from Graf Zeppelin's trials. Work never progressed beyond preliminary drawings, as Hitler's focus shifted entirely to land warfare and submarine production. The project died quietly in 1942 as Germany's carrier program collapsed. Britain's Malta-class carriers were authorized in October 1943, after the Admiralty studied American Essex-class successes in the Pacific. Designed at 56,800 tons, with capacity for 80 to 100 aircraft, Malta would have been the Royal Navy's largest carrier. 4 ships were planned, with construction scheduled to begin in 1945. The war's end and Britain's post-war economic crisis led to cancellation in November 1945. Malta's innovative steam catapults and deck-edge elevators influenced later British carrier designs. Japanese designers studied improved Taiho variants in late 1943 after analyzing combat lessons from the Coral Sea and Midway. These modified Taiho studies proposed increasing the armored flight deck's thickness, enlarging the air group to 75 aircraft, and improving damage control systems. By early 1944, Japan's shipbuilding capacity was focused on replacements for lost carriers and emergency conversions. The improved Taiho remained a paper study as Japan's industrial base collapsed. Japan's Naval General Staff commissioned studies in late 1944 for a true supercarrier exceeding 45,000 tons. Design documents called for multiple hangar decks, a 100-aircraft air group, and heavy anti-aircraft armament. By the time preliminary sketches circulated in early 1945, American bombing had crippled Japanese shipyards and steel production. The supercarrier study was abandoned in March 1945, 3 months before Japan's surrender. The US Navy's Ship Characteristics Board examined enlarged Midway variants in 1946, designated SCB-6A. These studies explored carriers of 65,000 to 70,000 tons to operate the heavy jet bombers then entering service. The design would have required entirely new construction facilities and unprecedented steel allocations. Budget realities and rapid jet aircraft development made the studies obsolete by 1948, when the Navy shifted focus to the flush-deck United States. Soviet naval planners developed Project 72 between 1945 and 1947 as Stalin pushed for a blue water fleet. The design called for a 44,000-ton carrier with steam catapults, 4 elevators, and capacity for 60 aircraft. Estimated construction time was 6 years, but Soviet shipyards lacked experience with carriers and catapult technology. The project was shelved in 1948, as Stalin prioritized battlecruisers and submarines over untested carrier concepts. Italy's Regia Marina developed carrier studies in 1942–43, after observing British and American successes in the Mediterranean. The most detailed proposal outlined a 28,000-ton fleet carrier converted from an incomplete battleship hull, carrying 45 aircraft. Italy's military collapse in September 1943 ended all naval construction, and the studies were captured by Allied forces. They revealed Italian recognition that carrier aviation had become essential for modern naval warfare. The USS United States CVA-58 was laid down at Newport News Shipbuilding on April 18, 1949. At 65,000 tons, the flush-deck supercarrier was designed to launch 100,000-pound nuclear bombers from 4 massive steam catapults. Secretary of Defense Louis Johnson cancelled the ship on April 23, 1949, just 5 days after keel laying, sparking the Revolt of the Admirals. The cancellation forced the Navy to prove existing carriers could deliver nuclear weapons, ultimately leading to the successful Forrestal-class. Britain's CVA-01 was developed from 1963 to 1966 as a 54,500-ton carrier to replace Ark Royal and Eagle. The design featured steam catapults, an angled deck, and capacity for 50 aircraft, including Phantom fighters and Buccaneer strike aircraft. Construction was scheduled to begin in 1967 at a cost of £60 million. On February 22, 1966, Defense Secretary Dennis Healey cancelled CVA-01 as part of Britain's withdrawal from east of Suez. The cancellation ended Britain's supercarrier ambitions for 4 decades. France's PA-58 Verdun emerged from 1955 studies for a large, conventionally powered carrier. At 45,000 tons, with capacity for 50 to 60 aircraft, PA-58 would have featured British steam catapults and American radars. Rising costs, estimated at 130 billion francs, and political opposition killed the project in 1961. France wouldn't commission a large carrier until Charles de Gaulle entered service in 2001, 4 decades later. Soviet Project 85, developed from 1972 to 1975, proposed a 60,000-ton carrier operating conventional aircraft and helicopters. The design featured 4 steam catapults, angled deck, and integrated missile defense systems. At 280 meters length, Project 85 would have rivaled American carriers. Leonid Brezhnev's government rejected the design in 1975, deeming it too expensive and incompatible with Soviet naval doctrine, emphasizing submarines and land-based aviation. The Orel-class, Project 1153, emerged in 1975 as the Soviet Navy's most ambitious carrier proposal. At 72,000 tons with conventional propulsion, Orel would have carried 60 to 70 conventional aircraft launched by steam catapults. 4 ships were planned, with lead ship construction tentatively scheduled for 1980. The Politburo rejected Project 1153 in 1978, citing enormous costs and questioning whether carriers fit Soviet defensive strategy. Instead, the Navy pursued smaller Kiev-class ships with V/STOL aircraft. The US Navy's Sea Control Ship concept evolved in the mid-1970s into larger variants, reaching 25,000 tons. These enlarged studies, designated VSS, V/STOL support ship, would have operated 20 to 24 Harriers and helicopters. Admiral Elmo Zumwalt championed the concept as an affordable alternative to supercarriers. Congress rejected funding in 1975, and the Navy refocused on nuclear-powered supercarriers. The VSS concept influenced Spain's Príncipe de Asturias and Italy's Garibaldi decades later. Project 1160, Orel, was the Soviet Navy's 1978 attempt at a true supercarrier. At 72,000 tons with conventional propulsion, the design featured an angled deck, 4 steam catapults, and capacity for 70 conventional aircraft, including Su-27K fighters. Estimated construction time was 8 years at a cost exceeding 2 billion rubles. The project was rejected in 1979 as economically unfeasible, with resources redirected to the smaller Admiral Kuznetsov class. Construction of Ulyanovsk, Project 1143.7, began at Nikolaev on November 25, 1988. The Soviet Union's first and only nuclear-powered carrier was designed at 79,758 tons, with steam catapults and capacity for 68 aircraft. The carrier was 40% complete, with over 18,000 tons of steel erected, when the Soviet Union collapsed in December 1991. Ukraine inherited the incomplete hull, which was scrapped in 1992 after Russia could not afford to complete construction. Ulyanovsk represents the closest the USSR came to matching American supercarriers. France developed nuclear supercarrier studies from 1975 to 1980, designated PA-75. The design called for a 75,000-ton carrier with 2 nuclear reactors, steam catapults, and capacity for 70 aircraft. Construction cost was estimated at 8 billion francs. Political debates over nuclear propulsion versus conventional power delayed decisions repeatedly. The project was abandoned in 1980, though its concepts informed the smaller Charles de Gaulle's design a decade later. Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force commissioned feasibility studies in 1967 to 68 for a 45,000-ton helicopter carrier that could, theoretically, be converted to operate fixed-wing aircraft. The studies remained highly classified due to Article 9 constitutional restrictions on offensive military capabilities. Political opposition and the estimated $800 million cost killed the project by 1969. The studies were declassified in the 1990s, revealing Japan's quiet examination of carrier options during the Cold War. China's first carrier design studies emerged in the late 1980s as the People's Liberation Army Navy sought blue water capabilities. Early concepts called for a 55,000-ton conventionally powered carrier with ski jump launch. The 1989 Tiananmen Square incident and subsequent Western arms embargoes halted serious development. China wouldn't acquire carrier technology until purchasing the incomplete Soviet carrier Varyag in 1998, which became Liaoning after extensive reconstruction. Britain's CVF nuclear variant was studied from 1986 to 1989 as the Royal Navy examined replacements for Invincible-class carriers. The 65,000-ton design featured nuclear propulsion, electromagnetic catapults, and capacity for 50 aircraft. Cost estimates exceeding £3 billion made the nuclear option politically unviable. The studies were abandoned in favor of the conventional Queen Elizabeth class, which finally entered service in 2017. Russia's Project 23,000E Storm was unveiled in 2015 as a 90,000-ton nuclear-powered supercarrier concept. The design features electromagnetic catapults, an angled deck, and capacity for 90 aircraft, including Su-57 stealth fighters and new carrier-based drones. Construction cost is estimated at $6 to $8 billion, with completion requiring 10 to 12 years. Economic sanctions, budget constraints, and technical challenges have kept Storm entirely conceptual. No construction is expected before 2030 at earliest. China's Type 003 Fujian, launched in 2022, confirmed the People's Liberation Army Navy's carrier ambitions. Intelligence assessments suggest Type 004 studies began around 2018 for a 100,000-ton nuclear-powered carrier with electromagnetic catapults and an air wing exceeding 70 aircraft. Chinese state media has acknowledged preliminary research, but provided no details. Type 004 remains in early design phases, with construction unlikely before 2030. The US Navy's Next Generation Air Dominance (NGAD) carrier studies, initiated in 2018, explore carriers of 115,000 to 120,000 tons, optimized for unmanned aircraft and directed energy weapons. These CVN-8X concepts feature advanced automation, reducing crew to under 3,000 sailors, AI-assisted operations, and electromagnetic launch systems for aircraft exceeding 100,000 pounds. The studies inform planning for carriers that will replace Nimitz-class ships beginning in the 2040s. Italy examined nuclear carrier concepts from 1978 to 1983, as the Marina Militare sought greater power projection. Studies outlined a 48,000-ton carrier with one nuclear reactor, ski jump launch, and mixed air group of fighters and helicopters. The estimated 1.2 trillion lira cost and political opposition to nuclear propulsion killed the project. Italy proceeded instead with the smaller, conventionally powered Giuseppe Garibaldi, commissioned in 1985. Spain's Armada studied enlarged carrier concepts from 1993 to 1997, building on the successful Príncipe de Asturias. The enlarged design proposed 38,000 tons, with capacity for 30 aircraft, including potential F-35B stealth fighters. Budget constraints during Spain's economic challenges ended serious consideration. The concepts later influenced Juan Carlos I's design, which entered service in 2010 as a hybrid carrier-amphibious assault ship. The US Navy's long-range planning documents since 2020 reference CVN-8X concepts exceeding 120,000 tons, incorporating directed energy weapons, hypersonic missile defense, laser systems, and autonomous aircraft operations. These next-generation supercarriers are envisioned for the 2050s and beyond, designed to maintain American carrier dominance against peer competitors. The immense costs, estimated at $25 to $30 billion per ship, and technological uncertainties keep these designs firmly in the conceptual phase, though they guide current R&D priorities.